Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag and drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. This is The Next Reel, everybody. I'm Pete Wright, and that there is Andy Nelson.
Hey, hey, hey.
And we spoil movies. Tonight on the show, Sergio Leone brings us a series of important object lessons in use of explosives to solve geopolitical challenges in the aptly titled Duck, You Sucker!
Sergio Leone, the master of adventure, who brought you A Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, now brings Rod Steiger and James Coburn together to blow you apart.
All right, Andy, we landed in this movie.
Yep.
I feel like that's the way I've been thinking about it. It's a movie that doesn't know its own name. It's a movie with fantastic people sounding ridiculous. It's a movie with one of the most cockamamie misplaced scores of any of the spaghetti westerns, any of the Leone films that we've watched. That score it rivals only one other Morricone film that I could think of. I wonder which one that is. We're talking about Duck You Sucker, or A Fistful of Dynamite, or Once Upon a Time, The Revolution. Why are we talking about this movie?
Well, this is a part of our series here. We're doing Leone's Once Upon a Time trilogy. As you pointed out, this one was called Once Upon a Time, The Revolution when it was released in France. Possibly the most apt name for the film once you've seen it. The other names, Duck You Sucker and A Fistful of Dynamite. Duck You Sucker is just a nonsensical name that happens to tie into some lines throughout the film. But it's a weird title. We'll come back to that as to why it was called that. A Fistful of Dynamite, it was just called that specifically to make audiences feel like it's more akin to the other films that Leone did, aka Fistful of Dollars in particular. Mm-hmm. But really, it's the revolution, and it's this connection in this final trilogy that Leone kind of did, with these stories about much more serious topics than the previous films that he had done. And this one is, just fits into that. And, I think largely it's a film to struggle through a little more than some of his other films, and more problematic for sure. But I think it has some good qualities, and looking at everything that was going on in 1968 when all of this started, and continuing through when this was actually released in 1971, it was definitely a period of political instability. And so telling a story about revolution and this whole idea of the kind of deconstructing the nature of revolution and how it really brings nothing but awfulness to everybody involved. I think that's kind of what Leone was maybe trying to do.
Yeah, and I think so. And I start out with a gaffe at it, but this movie is deeply aspirational. I mean, he's very clearly telling a serious story, and using this film to kind of showcase the political instability and the confusion of revolution, and sort of saying, this is what revolution looks like on the ground, and it's dirty and gross, and nobody quite understands the mechanics of it. They just understand the emotion of it, the feeling, what it feels like to be, put in this place of subservience, and it's a statement of poverty. It's a statement of what poverty elevates, what poverty motivates in humanity, and I think it's I think it's a strong message, and that's why this movie I find overall disappointing, because the film does not, in my view, live up to the message that comes across, and I think that's sad, because especially coming off of the experience I had with Once Upon a Time in the West.
It is a more disappointing film. I still find myself enjoying it, and it's certainly, as I've watched it over several decades now, several times, I do find myself enjoying it more. I think there are a lot of strong elements within the film. But certainly it just feels problematic. Like Leone, had some issues trying to figure out how to tell this story, and it feels a little sloppier, honestly, than some of his other films. But and it's funny because Leone was never really a hugely political person. And speaking about this film and how it may have some political messaging is kind of funny, but largely Leone's real political message was to keep your head down. And that's what the title was in Italy. It was Giù la testa, which is keep your head down. And he kind of roughly translated that to Duck You Sucker, which he apparently thought was this hugely popular phrase that Americans said all the time. And so he's like, oh, we'll call it Duck You Sucker because everyone in America says that all the time. People are like, I don't know, not really. And he's like, no, it'll be perfect. And
it's not perfect.
It's not perfect. It's a terrible title. Yeah, and that was a message that he felt was strong, and you can certainly see that as we get to the end of the film and the title finally comes up. that whole idea of keeping your head down. Now that John/Sean is dead, and Juan is left there by himself, and what do I do? And the title comes up, duck, you sucker, or keep your head down. And that was Leone's real message. And that made a lot of people in Italy upset, because they felt like that's not what you do. You need to stand up to this stuff. And I think in his own country, it was possibly a little more of a failure because of the way that message was portrayed, because people wanted to see him standing up. People wanted to see people standing up to these issues.
Well, and isn't that's my question for you, though, too, Andy, because I feel like as I'm watching this movie, I kind of knew going in after doing a little bit of pre-reading that was the general sentiment. And I was surprised that over the overall arc of the film, our characters do stand up. They do get involved. They say "duck, you sucker" literally about use of explosives, but the entire John storyline is to rope him back into someone else's revolution. Now it's the act that here's this ne'er-do-well sort of character who's roaming the globe trying to stay out of trouble and duck. Right, he's trying to duck the police who are after him all over the world as a terrorist. Now he can't get out of the experience of acting as a revolutionary because he's constantly roped into doing the right thing, and I say sort of the moral right thing, standing up for the little people, standing up for the oppressed, using his skills for the right of the many. So it's actually counter. The title itself is counter to the message that apparently Leone was trying to send. Like, none of the characters really did in a compelling way what he wanted to tell them to do.
Well, they didn't, but I think the idea of the film is, look at what happened to these people because they didn't keep their heads down. If Juan had only kept his head down and stayed out of this whole mess, maybe his whole family would have been alive. Maybe this whole issue that John had with his the friend/girlfriend in Ireland wouldn't have ended on such a tragic note. Maybe he wouldn't be dead if they had just kind of put their heads in the sand and not paid attention to all of the stuff that was going on around them. And I mean, even the quote at the very beginning that we have by Mao Zedong is all about how a revolution really is just a violent act. And it is just, I mean, that's the nature of it. It's not something that's meant to be glorified or anything. It just purely is a violent act. And we see that here as everybody is getting killed constantly throughout this film. And if they had only stayed away, perhaps it would have, they would have maybe still been suffering, but at least alive. And I think that's what he was going for.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's part of of why this is so convoluted, because he made John a hero, and he made, like, it's very easy to walk out of this movie and see John having stood up for the little people of Mexico in their revolution, shot in the back, having died, the death of a hero. He died doing what was right. It's very easy to walk out with that intention. I totally hear you, and I hear that they're, all of the titles and what are we doing, the Mao quotes at the beginning of this Western movie? I mean, that sends a particular message in itself. But
sure,
I feel like it doesn't outweigh the fact that he just displayed for us a Western hero doing the Western right thing.
Well, maybe. But it also, I think in there, you end up getting, when it comes to John's character, it gets tied into this whole flashback storyline that we have with him.
It's an
odd little flashback storyline that I don't think I fully understood. Listening to people talking about it in the special features, because this extended version of the film, this restored version that we both watched, has a lot more of these flashbacks. In particular, this last one, which is much longer, where we see John kissing his girlfriend back in Ireland. And then all of a sudden he stops kissing her, and his best friend, who's also there, he starts kissing his girlfriend, and then John is smiling about it, and we're like, oh, wait a minute. So this is a weird little threesome going on here.
Mhm.
It's kind of a confusing moment to have in the flashback here, trying to read exactly what's happening here. And I guess the intention, at least the way that these historians are describing it, is that this is possibly why John is seems to be so constantly thinking about the past and never really settled, because the whole idea of this threesome in the past, the fact that this scene was in the film, because it hadn't been until it was recently restored in the last couple decades, it perhaps implies that maybe John had some jealousy here, and he is actually the one who ratted out his friend to the other side, and that's why his friend is dragged in all beaten up. And then when John sees that, he goes and shoots the guards and shoots his friend and everything. But that's why he's kind of carrying around this guilt with him as he's driving around in Mexico. I don't think I really saw that. I think it was a little confusing. But again, it goes to this whole idea of this revolution, and it just is a mess. It makes a mess of things.
It does make a mess of things, but I think when I watch movies like this, I want to at least have a through line. And that sequence you bring up, that particular flashback when John ends up assassinating his friend and the police with him, it's one that hit me sideways. I didn't see it coming, and then I totally saw it coming as they're looking at each other and doing the incredibly slow motion nods, and it's the slow motion is just terrible. And I still don't feel like I have a complete intuitive thread about what the point was of all of those flashbacks. What are we trying to learn that he really needs us to know to keep the movie moving forward, to keep the story moving forward, that comes out of those flashbacks? I don't see it. It wasn't particularly beautiful. It was just these are just punctuation marks in the story that cause the film to slow down. And so I don't get it.
And it's done in a way, because of this whole threesome, all of a sudden it throws this confusing element into those flashbacks that I don't think necessarily needed to be there and don't necessarily help. If anything, as you're clearly pointing out, it just befuddles you, and it makes it a much more confusing element of the story that I feel like shouldn't be there and isn't helping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It isn't helping.
And if they were meant to kind of do that, and that was kind of the logic, it probably would have helped to not have them all silent flashbacks with just music, but to actually give us some of the story, so we could have pieced some of that together. And that's what I mean. This film feels a little sloppy. Like, some of that stuff I feel like he's handled a lot better in past films. When we had the flashbacks in just the last film, Once Upon a Time in the West, when we finally get to those final flashbacks and we see Henry Fonda's character Frank coming into focus, and we see that scene play out with a young harmonica and his brother, we all of a sudden everything is put into place. And I feel like maybe they were trying to do that here with this particular film, but it just creates more confusion, and I don't think it helps.
You wanted to talk a little bit about vulgarity.
It was just definitely a different tone, and it's interesting because, I mean, it's definitely a more vulgar film language-wise, and a lot of that ended up getting trimmed as it was going through its multiple incarnations of release. But also, it's just like starting the film off in such a vulgar way, where we have the peasant urinating on ants, and it's just, it's such a strange way to start the film, and it makes it hard to kind of like this character right out of the gate as he's doing this, and then he does this whole thing with this carriage and this robbery and this rape, And it's like, gosh, this is a tough character to have to be hanging out with for a little while. He's interesting, and I think Rod Steiger actually brings quite a bit of interesting stuff to him as a character. But I couldn't help but think that as I watched the opening of this film, that Leone was really tapping into Sam Peckinpah. And we talked about how Leone was very much a fan of looking at older films that he was such a big fan of and finding ways to kind of incorporate those into his own storytelling. This now feels like he's kind of moved past the John Fords and those filmmakers that he had been looking at, and now is like looking at a filmmaker who's doing a little more serious storytelling and darker storytelling and more vulgar storytelling, and looking at Sam Peckinpah, because this just really felt like that, and certainly gave me the vibes of how The Wild Bunch starts. And it's really interesting to see how he's doing that, and keeps this film feeling a lot more kind of that in that vulgar world. And I don't know if he's trying to do that because our main character is a peasant. Like, is he trying to say something about the vulgarity of the lower class or something? I'm not quite sure, but it is an interesting way to kind of build this story.
It is. I actually found that open to be really interesting, and in many respects, that's the stuff I liked of Rod Steiger the most. Until toward the very end of the film, I thought the introduction of him and what he has done to just to damage his family, to create the little terrorists out of his kids. I think that's a really interesting sort of fabric that he weaves for us in the very beginning here, and the takeover of the carriage, the most amazing carriage in the West. It's like a museum inside the carriage, as everybody's kind of doing their thing and eating their little meals, and they're all horrible, horrible people. I mean, if you could ever hang a flag on elite, these are the people who would wear it. And they welcome him. They welcome Juan into the carriage. Actually, it seems like on some sort of a little bit of a vindictive welcome, right? The carriage driver says, "Oh, I can't wait to see their faces when they see you," right? And it turns out, it's because he's got this sort of barefoot peasant that they're throwing into this carriage full of elites, and then we get into this weird ASMR racist food show. Can we talk about that?
I like how you describe it.
Well, it's the worst Food Network show ever.
This absolutely has to be on the list for our Saturday matinee option, like list options, is disgusting eating scenes.
Yeah, you're so right. It's bad.
It's horrifying to watch, and intentionally so. It's just, I could not help, again, talking about how he was looking at films of Peckinpah. This really reminded me of films of Buñuel, and particularly, I mean, we had talked about Viridiana on this show, and it had a feel of that sort of, the elite were disgusting pigs. And I thought that was an actually really interesting way to play this scene, as disgusting and disturbing as it was to watch.
Well, and the way they shot it, right? The way it was shot and cut, those incredible close-ups on mouths, right? As they're eating and putting food in their mouth. And then the camera would linger on her mouth as she would put like a cherry in her mouth. And you'd see the juice kind of cresting her lips as she was sucking on it. I mean, it's really tough for people with food anxieties. Don't watch this movie. It's really tough to get through. But again, it hammers home the central kind of ideological message of this movie, and that is this is going to be a movie about the rich and the poor, the educated and the non-educated, and just a study of what poverty does to people. And I think that in fact is fascinating.
Not just that, but also which Juan will say. He has his whole diatribe about revolution and what it does to them, and how the poor people get involved in it and the rich people push them to do it. And he's just like, but what happens to the poor people? They end up dead.
Exactly.
And because
right.
The rich people use the poor people as pawns. And it's the same thing that, I would say that a country will do with its soldiers and in military.
is they recruit young people to go in and do it, so all of the rich people don't have to. The rich and old people don't have to. I think that's also part of the point here, is watching these people who are completely separated from this whole revolution that's happening in Mexico. You know, this whole idea of the Zapata and the rest of all this, the revolutionary acts happening across this country as I think it was the Huerta regime was fighting back, and everything was collapsing. I mean, this is a carriage of people who are completely disconnected from anything dealing with reality. And it was interesting to see it, like this mansion floating across the desert. You know, it was a strange way to depict it. Again, right. Continuing to remind me of Buñuel.
So let's talk a little bit more about Rod Steiger as this kind of Zapata figure. I had trouble. I had trouble with Steiger, and I love Rod Steiger, and this was not an easy watch.
It certainly is easier the more I've watched it. I find fewer and fewer problems with it as I continue, and it's not so bad now. I don't find it as much, but it is not as good as it would have been if Eli Wallach had done it. I know he was originally the choice for the role and cast in the role, and then due to unfortunate circumstances with the studio, ended up getting replaced by somebody with a little more heft with their name.
Well, that was really unfortunate. My understanding is that the problem with the studio was simply that that Steiger owed him a movie, and so they said, we're not going to underwrite this movie unless Steiger's in it. So Wallach's out.
Yeah, it's frustrating the way that sometimes the business end works with the creative side of things.
Right.
And this is a case where I think it did hurt it. I mean, again, I don't mind him in the film. I actually kind of like him as this down on his luck Mexican peasant robber. He's a kind of fun, but I just feel as I watch it that, you know, it really fits with Eli Wallach. And once you know that Eli Wallach, that whole kind of Tuco character was meant to kind of be in the film, it would have worked so well. And it is frustrating to see that this is how it happened.
Well, and so we have Steiger as Juan, and the opening sequence we were just talking about includes a strange and disturbing rape sequence.
It really is. It's disturbing, and it's not disturbing because of its graphic nature or anything, but I think what just disturbs me is, again, this is our protagonist, and here he is raping this rich woman. Mm-hmm. But that the storytellers use the awful tactic after the fact that the rape has happened to have the woman, it seems like there's this bit of, she's a bit enamored with him afterward, as if that, you know, oh, okay, he's our protagonist, so I'm
his masculinity won me over.
Right. And it just ends up feeling, even knowing that it's, you know, a 37-year-old film doesn't help, or 47, whatever it is, it still doesn't help. It really still makes me struggle a little bit with that particular element of the story.
I've got a few other highlights and just highlight sequences for me when you talk about things that, like this, in this case, the rape sequence at the beginning, it doesn't work for me. I find it really disappointing. But later in the film, we have a sequence where Juan returns to the cave, and he sees something. We don't know what he sees until John gets back, and Juan picks up a gun and leaves. And then we get the sequence where John wanders through the cave and sees what Juan had seen. And it turns out the entire village is in there having been assassinated.
Well, the village, I mean, it's really the all of the, it's his family.
It's his family.
Everybody who's basically in the part of the revolution on their side. Like their whole team has basically been massacred in the cave.
Team one.
It's a horrifying scene to see and seeing what happened. And there actually was a massacre in a grotto in Italy during World War II that everybody would have recognized this as kind of a tribute to that, and it would have kind of upset people seeing this. It's interesting though, because we've talked about Leone and his patience as a filmmaker and how he really plays with his reveals. Often in his films, he'll have something happen and you don't really know what it is exactly. And then, until moments later, you'll finally get that reveal. There's a fantastic one that we have in this film when Juan is on the train and he's just shot a train conductor and thrown him out. And all of a sudden he turns around and there's another conductor there with a gun pointed out at him, and he's holding him up. He says, "Put your hands up." And Juan puts his hands up, and then suddenly and slowly the train conductor also puts his hands up. And it's like, what is going on here? And then Juan kind of looks behind and he sees that behind him there is this other character that we haven't met yet, but we are soon to meet in the film, Dr. Viega, who has his gun in the back of the conductor. And it was a fantastic reveal, and it's really fun, and that is a great use of Leone's skill in playing with his reveal and using that mystery to kind of build his story.
Now, absolutely. And now I feel like you're setting me up for
I'm
absolutely
totally
disagreeing
I am.
with the cave murders.
No, I do think it's horrifying. But unfortunately, the way that the scene plays out, it is many, many, many minutes before we finally get the reveal of what he's looking at. And because of that, I find it very off-putting, because it happens right after another scene where there was he and John had just blown this bridge up and killed all of these people that were a part of the Huerta army, and then we cut to him in the cave, and we're just looking at his face for such a long period of time that you almost lose track that he's actually looking at something. And I start thinking, like, is he just having a really hard time with the fact that he just killed several dozen people? It really, I found that this patience required for this reveal was far too long. And unfortunately, I feel like it just doesn't work for me. And it's very disappointing. So by the time I see it and I understand what he actually had been looking at, I feel like I lost the momentum with the emotion that would have happened if I got it, several minutes earlier.
That's interesting. I did not have that reaction to it, and I am willing to write that off to first time kind of exhilaration of the sequence. It felt like it was a moving sequence to me, particularly the exchange between John and Juan at the end when he picks up the gun and walks out, and John says, "Oh, don't go out there. They're waiting for you." But of course, John hasn't seen what Juan has seen, and so once he discovers that, and we get that long exit, John's long walk into the light out of the cave, I think I found very moving. I think the thing that undoes this sequence is the music. This boppy, stupid musical track underneath all this grief is this is a great example to me of the kind of weird musical choices that they make throughout the entire film with this stupid score.
I like the score. But I do agree that it isn't necessarily always perfectly designed to fit some of the stuff that's happening. I do like the tracks, like the Sean, like the weird little Sean theme. It's a funny name issue with Sean and John because he was scripted as Sean, the song was written as Sean, but then everybody calls him John, and it's like nobody actually knew what his name was as they made this film, and it just ended up being John. But
it's par for the course in a movie like this.
Exactly. It just feels like it fits. I like his theme. I like the March of the Beggars, I think is what Juan's theme is. I think it all is really interesting music. There are times I think the music fits nicely in the film, but often, as you are very astutely pointing out, there are times where, unfortunately, it just doesn't fit and it doesn't feel like it's working the way it should. And I feel like there are times when Morricone could have used more than a couple themes in his film, given us some other ones to allow for some of those different emotions that we are feeling over the course of a film, especially one like this that begins with a much more comedic, satiric look at the world and moves emotionally into a much darker place over the 2 hours and 36 minutes. I feel like it warranted having a change in music as well.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think this is a score that would work for a movie that's more consistently goofy, has more consistently goofy elements or goofy relationship. Like, I mean,
well, that's why it works in the beginning. I think it works perfectly in the beginning. You got this weird introduction between these two characters and the throwing of the dynamite and just the weird, like, comparing sizes through that whole beginning. I don't know. I felt like the music worked really nicely, but it does require something else.
Yeah, I think it just comes off the rails, and I don't like that. I didn't particularly like the music, even that it fits. It just is not my taste, and
Sure.
So the fact that it just leans into more of the goofiness in the music as the movie absolutely changes tone is tone deaf, and so I was not crazy about that. But point taken. Other sequences that really moved me: the bridge explosion was beautiful
Wow.
and tough to watch.
It feel my my fillings rattle.
Where was that? Whose bridge did they blow? Whose driveway did they blow up? There's got to be something on Google Maps.
I just know they blow a big bridge up, and I don't know. I know I heard them talking about where it was and stuff, but
Yeah.
I know in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, when they blew the bridge up there, and I believe we talked about this, there were issues with it as far as igniting it before they were supposed to, and it was a little too close to the actors, and some people could have gotten seriously injured. This was one where they didn't do that. They did everything correctly. And I mean, they just blew the heck out of it. And it's quite an amazing explosion that we get to witness.
Yeah, it's just carnage. I imagine this was before animal rights groups got involved in filmmaking.
We've talked about stunts with horses on Stagecoach. We've talked about it on even at the Planet of the Apes. There are some horse falls in here, especially in that sequence as the horses are kind of falling and rolling down the side of this dry river gorge that just look like, well, they probably just pulled the gun out and shot the horse after that one, because damn, that didn't look like a safe fall.
It was some of that was much harder to watch than the particular peril of the stunt teams is what they did to these animals. It's not great.
No, it's not.
It is. I'll say it's not the worst that we've seen, but it's not great.
Yeah.
Other sequences that particularly light me up, so to speak, the beautiful shots of the lights, the headlights turning on, or the lights in front of the train, in front of the trucks, as they were checking the revolutionaries at night in the rain. I thought was an incredibly before the firing squad. Yeah, I thought that was a brilliantly executed, so to speak, sequence leading up to another really gruesome bit of the film where we see just more and more people shot. Now, of course, we actually have this long, I think it's later, this long kind of flyover crane shot of all of the ditches of the firing squads as the oh god, it's tough to watch.
Like death pits is what I call them.
It's the death pits, right?
It is a horrifying scene to watch, and just looking at kind of the reality of the way a revolution treated people and what happened with people, and how people largely became less than people and just became an obstacle to deal with. And as you watch these soldiers just gunning down person after person, once they get to Mesa Verde and he kind of gets into this revolution, the rest of the film, I feel like every 10 minutes, if there's not another firing squad, then the film wasn't doing its job, according to Leone, because holy cow, there are so many firing squads, so many people getting executed throughout this.
Well, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over the course of the film until we get these the death pits, which is a really gruesome. You've seen this imagery before if you've studied any of these things, any of these revolutions, and particularly Nazi imagery is just kind of peppered throughout this film. So to great effect in terms of that sort of emotional thread.
Certainly. And I think if you've ever seen any of the work of Francisco Goya, who I think is just one of the best artists in history, just some beautiful, beautiful work. He had some art, some prints, in particular one called The Disasters of War, that Leone really felt imbued this whole sense of these firing squads and the executions. And that was something that he and his DP, Giuseppe Ruzzolini, really used in order to kind of create these looks. And I think largely the one you're talking about in The Night in the Rain was one that they used because he really liked the way that just kind of the stark contrast of the light and the dark really played. How'd
they get it made? This was a rougher one.
It was, certainly. While they were in production on Once Upon a Time in the West, Sergio Donati, who had been collaborating with him on that film, came up to Leone with a treatment for this film. He was really trying to get the ideas of all this revolution. Riots were breaking out in Paris. There was all this idea of revolution and left-wing nationalism, particularly among university students and filmmakers. And they felt like this would be a good story to tell. And Donati certainly kind of created that in the script that he had written. And then Leone and Luciano Vincenzoni worked on the script and really tried to figure out what they were going to do with it. And Leone, he went into this for some reason. I don't exactly know why, because my recollection from the last film is that he had kind of struck this 3-picture deal with a producer to kind of get funding for these 3 films to make these 3 pictures. For some reason, he said, I'm not going to direct this one. I'm only going to produce it. I don't know how that works when you're doing a 3-picture deal, but that's what he apparently said. And he brought in, of all people, Peter Bogdanovich to direct this film.
P-Bog.
Yeah. And he came out and they started kind of talking about it and stuff. But apparently they really didn't get along because Leone had a very Leone style with his films, even though he was inspired by the works of Howard Hawks and John Ford and all those guys, as was Bogdanovich. But Bogdanovich really wanted to do something that was much more controlled and in some of those Hollywood styles. And Leone really didn't like that because he wanted to be this bigger Leone film. And so Bogdanovich finally quit. He just said he wouldn't be able to work with Leone. Then they went to Sam Peckinpah, which is interesting, knowing that earlier I talked about how the opening feels like almost this homage to Peckinpah.
Right.
Peckinpah actually agreed to direct, but United Artists, who was financing it, turned him down because of I don't know what the financial reasons were. I don't know if he was asking for too much money. I don't really know, but that was turned down. And then Leone brought his assistant director, Giancarlo Santi, on to direct it, and actually started directing the film with him at the helm. And he did 10 days of shooting. But Rod Steiger, who had agreed to be a part of this film because Leone was going to be directing it, he said, "I'm not going to play my role, or I'm not going to do this anymore." Actually, I think what he said is because he said, "Hey, Leone, why don't you direct this?" And he's like, "Oh no, Giancarlo's doing it. I'm still here. Don't worry." And Steiger said, "Okay, that's fine. Tomorrow, my cousin's going to be here, but don't worry. He'll do just fine. I'll be here making sure he does just fine." And then that was kind of, I think, the final linchpin to Leone saying, "All right, fine, I will come on board and direct it." And so it took some arm twisting, but I feel like that is why this film feels a little sloppier, a little more awkward. Maybe it was because his assistant director Giancarlo Santi had directed some of it. There's a little more confusion. Maybe Leone didn't want to be at the helm of this one. I think all of those little things lend to this feel of it being just a little messier.
We've covered Rod Steiger. We have not talked at great length about James Coburn. And for me, that's because I have fewer qualms about James Coburn. He is just delightful on screen, even if I'm not always convinced that what he's doing makes a lot of sense.
I think he's great. He's just a fun actor in the part. I love seeing him on his motorbike with his little get up. He just he just feels like an Irishman, even if his Irish accent is a little flimsy at times. I just end up really liking him. And I mean, I do end up liking his relationship with Rod Steiger's character. I think the two of them are actually a really interesting pair, and I like quite a bit. But I think we talked about it last time. Coburn actually had been considered for A Fistful of Dollars and Once Upon a Time in the West. It didn't end up working out. This character, though, was originally written for Jason Robards because of his role in Once Upon a Time in the West.
Right.
But as we learned with Eli Wallach, the studio wanted a bigger name. They approached Clint Eastwood, but he felt it was basically the same character he'd already played, and he wanted to do something different. And he actually wanted to stop doing stuff with the Italian film industry, which I think is funny. And then interestingly, they approached George Lazenby, which is kind of a funny choice. And then Malcolm McDowell. And finally, they settled on James Coburn.
Which is so funny. I mean, at least between Lazenby and McDowell, you can imagine them getting a little bit closer to the accent.
Right, yeah.
Because accents in general in this movie are all over the place.
Going back to, speaking of accents and voices, just jumping back real quick to Rod Steiger, an interesting little element. As we know, these Italian films, they record the audio after the fact. They don't run sound on set because they're talking and they're directing and all this sort of stuff. Rod Steiger is of the acting school that really feels, my performance is not just about what I'm doing with my body, but it's also in my voice. And he really pushed Leone to about that because he wanted his voice to be recorded. And Leone finally had to find a happy medium and said, okay, we'll record your voice on set, but everybody else, we're going to just, do the old fashioned way.
Wow. So between Steiger and Coburn did the ADR. I
guess. I mean, obviously, if they're in scenes together, I'm assuming
they would have to record that audio, sure.
Right.
We have Romulo Valli as Dr. Viega. You already mentioned Dr. Viega. He has a nice little role in this film.
Yeah, he is an actor that I feel like I've seen before, but when I look at his credits, I actually don't think I have. But he's got a face that just looks very familiar. And I mean, he's likely somebody I've seen in film imagery, but just haven't actually seen the films. Films like The Leopard or Barbarella. He has a great film face.
To me, he's Peter Sellers. I could not see anything. Every time he came on screen, I was like, that's totally Peter Sellers. Even though I know that's not Peter Sellers. There's no Peter Sellers in the list of names. That I couldn't get it out of my head.
That's
spitting
funny,
image.
But I can see it.
Yeah. And there were women in passing in this film. This felt more like a Leone movie.
Right. Either getting raped or dismissed.
That's pretty much the strong female roles in Duck You Sucker. Good luck.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Did this one get any award attention?
At the David DiDonatello Awards, it did win for Best Director. Sergio Leone actually tied with Franco Zeffirelli, who was directing Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon at the same time. So they did win that. And then it did win a Saturn Award in 2008 for Best DVD Collection as a part of the Sergio Leone anthology. Weirdly, it was the Dollars trilogy and this film.
What?
That was the DVD collection. That's what they collected.
There are some holes there. Did anybody tell them there are a couple of significant holes?
Apparently, that's why it was only a nominee, Pete, not a winner.
I got a surefire way they can boost their award attention. Surefire.
The collection that won was the Mario Bava collection, which had a much larger collection of titles included in that.
I'm feeling that. I would have voted for it too.
Yeah.
All right. How'd it do at the box office?
Well, Pete, this is another of those films with its financial information buried by the passage of time. Unfortunately, I could not find anything about how much this movie cost. The only bits I found were that it was released in the UK on October 29th, 1971, and here in the US on June 28th, 1972, opposite Buck and the Preacher, a Western directed by Sidney Poitier, his directorial debut actually, and starring Poitier, Harry Belafonte, and Ruby Dee. This film was moderately successful in Italy, where it grossed 2 billion lira on its first run. It was also the fourth most popular movie of the year in France, and that's all I got.
Well, it sounds about right to me, but we're going to see how the chips fall out with this movie when we rank it.
We will have to do that, yes.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel, and you can see the list of all the movies we've talked about on this very show. If you're interested in adding it to your own catalog, just swipe over in your show notes and tap the word Flickchart. It should take you straight over to this movie in the Flickchart database where you can add it to your list and see how it stands up against ours.
All right, first up, we have The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Numi version, or Duck-You-Sucker.
I'm going to go with Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, please.
Me too. We've got Giù la Testa, or Christmas in July. Christmas in July for me.
Christmas in July as well.
We got Duck-You-Sucker, or Near Dark.
Near Dark?
Here I'm going to say Duck-You-Sucker.
Really?
Yep.
How strongly do I feel about this? I had some issues with Near Dark too. I don't know if you remember that.
I think we both did.
Yeah. All right, I'll give you Duck-You-Sucker.
Duck-You-Sucker, or The Girl Who Played with Fire.
Girl Who Played with Fire.
Yep, I'll say the same thing. Duck-You-Sucker, Volunteers, absolutely Volunteers for me.
Yeah, I'm going to give you Volunteers with a heart.
All right. Duck-You-Sucker, or The Young Girls of Rochefort. I say Duck-You-Sucker.
Yeah, okay.
That film was not as magical for me as
the music was so much better.
Duck-You-Sucker, or Cloverfield.
Cloverfield.
Yeah, I guess I'll say Cloverfield. Duck-You-Sucker, or Major League. Gosh, that hasn't popped up in ever.
Major League.
Yeah, I'm going to say Major League. Duck-You-Sucker, or Star Trek Into Darkness.
Star Trek Into Darkness.
I have to go with Duck-You-Sucker.
No, you don't. Come on.
I do. This is the worst of the... Oh, this one's so dumb.
Okay, here we go.
All right.
1, 2, 3.
Scissors.
Oh, I don't like that.
Well, don't worry. It's only one spot above.
Okay.
This landed at 323 out of 377.
Wow.
One spot above Star Trek Into Darkness.
All right.
So this is a little lower than our last film, which ended up in our top 10.
A little lower. How'd this do in your personal flick chart, please?
This one did better for me. I do like this film, even though I have issues with it. It's not a film that is 5 stars with quibbles, though. This is a film that landed at 1960 out of 4,056, which is about 52% on my chart.
Okay. Mine landed right at 806 out of 1,045, which is 23% of my chart. So if I were to go by the algorithm, that should be, Flickchart says that should be a 1 star everywhere else. I am a little bit more optimistic about this movie. I'm going to give it a 2 star over on Letterboxd. What are you thinking?
Is that a 2 star with a like or no like?
It's a Casablanca like. If I gave it any thought, I probably would.
I am at a 3 star on this one. 3 stars with a like.
Okay.
I do like this, but I find it to be, not counting Leone's very first film, which I don't really count as a Leone film. I find this his most problematic and frustrating film to watch, even though I do get things out of it when I do watch it.
I'm fascinated by those things. I think this is an aspirational film. I think it has big eyes, and it can't always figure out what to do with what it sees.
Yeah.
I don't know. I am curious by some of the reviews. Again, I don't mean to belabor the music, but come on, man. This is off of Elvis Mitchell, who writes, or formerly of the New York Times, said that this is one of Morricone's most, quote, glorious and unforgettable scores, and sees that Invention for John which plays over the opening credits and is essentially the film's theme, is as epic and truly wondrous as anything Morricone ever did. And thus, Elvis Mitchell was never heard from again.
I can't argue with Elvis Mitchell. I really like it. Well, I wouldn't say it's his greatest thing that he's done, but I do really like the music. I just wish that there were some other things in here other than those pieces.
Yeah. I have to go delete about 1,000 episodes of The Treatment off my phone now. Damn.
Bye, Elvis. Oh.
All right, Andy. It was fine, but I got to tell you, I'm really looking forward to this coming week. What are we doing next?
Well, we are going to be. This is quite a big break in films, which is pretty interesting because Leone had really been cranking films out for quite a length of time. It's interesting to look at his career. And you see this run that he did of films from 1961 through 1971. That's the bulk of his career, all laid out from the Colossus of Rhodes all the way up to Duck You Sucker. And then all of a sudden he has this 13-year jump. And that's where we finally get Once Upon a Time in America in 1984. And that is what we'll be talking about next week.
It's been a while since I've watched this movie, and I have to say I've missed it.
Have you seen the most recent extended version of it that's been restored?
I'm gonna say probably not. I still have not acquired it for our conversation, so it's not currently in my collection. What should I get?
Well, I would think that that's the version that you're going to look for. I'm curious actually what they have, because the restored version they did, I think in 2012, it played at Cannes, and then they released it, but they did release it with both versions available. The extended, I don't know if they call it the extended, I think they just call it the restored director's cut, and then there's the theatrical cut. Well,
what I've got here is, I don't know. Yeah, I guess it is. I don't see any extras, but what I usually get, the iTunes version, is 3 hours and 49 epic minutes.
Then that is not the extended director's cut.
So what do I have to get? Curses. Now I have to look for stuff. All right. Well, the search begins, but next week, Once Upon a Time in America, I need to actually quit my job, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, it is 4 hours, and I think it's like 4 hours and 29 minutes, 19 minutes, somewhere in there. That's the extended cut.
Okay,
so it's 4 hours plus.
Okay, that's the
beefy film.
That is a beefy film. I don't think I have ever seen all of the film. There it is, extended director's cut. Holy cow! Must begin tonight. So we gotta hurry. Thanks, Andy. This has been great.
Well, folks, if you want to hear more of us, but you can't wait until next week's show, you can support us over on patreon.com/thenextreel, and you can get access to our exclusive members-only weekend show, The Saturday Matinee.
We talk about movie reviews and new trailers, plus we go head-to-head in our weekly challenge in which we put together lists of movies related in some way to the movie we're discussing that week.
There are all sorts of other goodies, too, if you support us at different levels. Just head on over to patreon.com/thenextreel.
You can learn more about us and check out the detailed show notes at thenextreel.com.
You can subscribe for free in your favorite podcast app and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at The Next Reel.
And if you want to get into the conversation yourself, join our Discord channel for a whole lot of movie chat with movie lovers from around the world. You can find the link to join in the show notes or on the website.
The Next Reel couldn't happen without the hard work of Stephen Smart running Instagram.
Ben Lott runs all things Twitter.
And thanks to Eli Catlin, who graciously allows us to use his song Ragtime Instrumental as the theme to the show. You can find out more about Eli on his SoundCloud page.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Amazon giveth, Andy.
As Amazon always doeth.
Did they? Did they for you?
They have some pretty fun little 1 stars. I had a good time going through these.
Since I went low, I started high on the review, so I'm in the 5 stars. And this is territory I don't tread often. And I would like to start with the good Jesse, who writes with a 5-star. Love it. This movie is not as full of stuff you need to view 5 to 10 times to catch in Blazing Saddles, but nobody can hide stuff as well as Mel Brooks. However, it is just as much fun.
Wow. Okay.
That was the whole thing. I think also Jesse didn't like Blazing Saddles all that much.
Blazing Saddles and Duck You Sucker.
I would like to know, Andy, based on that review, how you would compare and contrast Blazing Saddles and Duck You Sucker by Andy Nelson. You may begin.
I thought we just watched Blazing Saddles. We were talking about that for an hour.
Best podcast ever. What's yours?
Oh, I'm so torn because there are several, but I think I'm going to go with this one. It's a 1 star by Booer58, who just says, ugh, for the beer and grits type.
What? Who is
Apparently,
that?
I
A
don't
gentleman
know,
does not eat beer and grits. Oh no. Grits demands more of a mimosa. Something with bubbles. Thanks, Amazon. It is hard to believe that we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
So many great movies, so many great conversations. But it's a lot of work. Producing this show week after week does require a lot behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We had some great films in Season 8 that started their lives as books or plays, and you can find all of them on our Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals.
That's the site where listeners can find links to purchase all the source material behind the adapted films we covered, from Season 1 up through our current season.
For part of Season 8, we had a series celebrating the 50th anniversary of films from 1968.
We talked about 2001 and 2010 for our Odyssey series, both adapted from Arthur C. Clarke's novels. Man, the second one was so much better than the first, right?
Don't you even get me started. Need I bring up Under the Cherry Moon again?
Yes, also so much better.
Wait, no, that's not what I...
Planet of the Apes kicked off its series based on the novel by Pierre Boulet.
We covered Danger Diabolic and The Detective, adapted from novels for our 1968 crime films.
Wait, wasn't that The Detective the prequel to Die Hard?
They were both written by Roderick Thorpe, and yes, it's the same character in the books.
I can't believe they even asked Sinatra if he'd be in Die Hard. That would have been weird.
Once Upon a Time in America was part of our Leone Once Upon a Time trilogy, adapted from Harry Gray's novel.
And we looked at 1968 Best Picture nominees The Lion in Winter, Rachel, Romeo and Juliet, and Oliver!
We also had an Ingrid Bergman series with adaptations like Spellbound, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Murder on the Orient Express, and Gaslight.
We haven't talked about Gaslight.
Stop gaslighting me!
Dive deeper into these books and more adapted films at thenextreel.com/originals. Every purchase supports the podcast.
Get the full list of adaptations that we've covered on all the Next Reel family of podcasts and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.